Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see if I randomly go off the air. It's because my cat has suddenly jumped on my keyboard. So we'll do our best to avoid that. I'm Sam Temple. You probably know that if you follow the page. And we're off to a rockin' and not awkward at all start when I got distracted by my cat. Just thought I'd offer a live stream option today as well. Earlier today I was in Garfield Park talking about accessibility, high-speed internet, basically our communications infrastructure, and talking about our market for different things like that, because it's a little bit of a dry issue, but when we talk about the cost of living that folks are dealing with, when we talk about the opportunities that people have locally, creating an environment where everyone, rich and poor, working people, retired folks in school, we need communications infrastructure like high-speed internet, public communications. Those are really important things for the local community, and they're important for everyday folks in Faribault. So we had a good conversation about that, and when folks show up to these events, we end up talking about a lot of different things. There's my cat. All right. Honeysuckle, you can not attack my camera. Give me 1 second here, folks. Well, he's made cameos before, but he's never gotten as involved in a live stream as that. So we'll see if that happens again. Today was a really lovely day. The weather ended up being really nice in Garfield Park. And that in itself is such a beautiful story as well, if you don't know the story of Garfield Park. That was actually one of the stories that we covered in the Heritage Days series that we put together for Faribault Community Television, talking about civic engagement, folks getting involved in the community. And that was one of our volunteer stories about a group of Faribault citizens who passionately wanted Garfield, where the site of the former Garfield School, to be Garfield Park. And now it is, and it is a lovely park, a lovely garden. And it was a good place to have an event. Last week I was at Wapakuta Park, talking about housing and rental reform, and that was another really good conversation. We've been lucky so far with really nice weather for all of these events. Today it got a little nippy by the end, but that was just part of the Minnesota goodbye, I think, of slowly getting people back into their cars. So then by 4 o'clock, everyone was cold enough that they wanted to go home. But it's always, it reminds me why I decided to run. It reminds me why I thought I might enjoy and be effective in this position. When I have conversations with folks, we can talk about their basic struggles, and whether it's talking about mental health challenges that families have faced. That was a big point of conversation today, where that wasn't on the agenda or anything, but we're in a park. We're just there to talk. We're there to better understand each other. And you can tell when people just needed to have someone to talk to. They just needed someone to make them feel heard and make them feel like, I've passed the information along, so now when there's an issue talking about mental health funding at the county level, there's someone who knows my experience, and maybe they'll consider my experience when they're having to vote on those issues. And it's been that way with with every event so far, and with different areas, different policies that the county has to deal with. And we get abstract sometimes about the challenges that take place in local government, and we can kind of forget the human beings that it affects. We forget the human element in in whether, do we fund one position in this department or two? Do we focus our policy on this demographic or that demographic? Do we decide to spend money to translate all these documents into multiple languages? How closely did we consider every bit of that rental ordinance policy to consider how it might affect folks different from us? What have we not considered? What have we overlooked? Just taking a second to ask those questions. It might make the debate on an issue go on a little bit longer. But it affects so many lives that maybe it's worth taking the time for that debate. Maybe it's worth the time asking those questions. And these events that I've been having in the parks, they just remind me every time why I'm doing this, why it's valuable, and why I want to serve this community in the first place. One thing that has come up quite a bit, and I had a lot of good. I had a lot of fun at the AAUW event this last Thursday. That was a really, really enjoyable event. I enjoyed the opportunity to be in the council chambers with folks. I recognized a lot of folks that I knew from around town, that I've known just from living here, folks that have been supportive of the Paradise Center for the Arts, folks that have maybe taken some of my Elder Collegium courses, or they've been supportive of my history work. So it's always just good to be able to see some familiar faces, see some faces that I didn't recognize, and to have the challenge of answering questions on the spot. Having the opportunity to be in the same room as my opponent, Mr. Hoisington, having the opportunity to contrast what our thought processes are like on different issues. You might only have 30 seconds to consider it if you're the first person to answer the question. But it shows, I think, how we process both of these issues. And I tried as much as I could to not just answer the questions, again, kind of the policy wonk answers. I wanted to try to explain, give context for the challenges that the community's facing. And I feel good about that. Of course, you always think, oh, geez, I could have answered that one better. I could have done better on this one or that one. But I felt very comfortable with that audience. I felt very comfortable with the materials, the subject materials. I felt well prepared, and I think I highlighted my willingness to tackle those big issues. One piece that has come up quite a bit, and I've struggled with fully what to do here, because I wanted to contrast myself to my opponent without coming across it as negative. But I think, and I don't feel it's my place to try and represent Mr. Hoisington's views. Of course, that's his position. But I've had people ask me, well, what are the big differences between you two? And there are a few things that I've picked up on that I'm comfortable passing along because they've been such a solid part of his answers, both with the AAUW and on the radio on KDHL with Gordy, or even in our chamber Q&A videos, or the Faribault Daily News questionnaire. And Mr. Hoisington has a lot of belief in the free market, has a lot of belief in the market meeting the needs of the people. I understand the appeal of that perspective, but to me, trusting wholly in the free market does not serve everyday people. It does not serve working people, especially when more and more companies are bought up by larger companies. I mean, we saw that even with Faribault Foods merging or being purchased, however you want to word it, with La Castagna, suddenly things aren't in local control. It's not necessarily about the human beings at the local level and how these decisions affect your neighbors. Whether you only have one power company to choose from. For a lot of folks in Faribault, they only have one internet provider to choose from. And again, that was one of the subjects in the conversation in the park today. How are you truly being served if there is no competition for a particular service? If there is no competition between one provider and another provider, there's no incentive for the sole provider to improve their service, to consider how they can better meet the needs of people. Because, or even when we talk about housing, with a 0.5 vacancy rate, what incentive does someone have to improve their service, to improve their properties, to directly address the concerns of their customers, whether we're talking about internet or housing or power or any of that? What incentive do you have? Ideally, we all have ideals, right? We want businesses, we want services to be striving to deliver a good product simply because it's the right thing to do, and we should all have a standard of excellence. I agree with that principle. That's what I try to do in all of my work, is to try and do a good job for the sake of doing a good job. But the incentive, especially when you get to larger and larger companies, it's not about any of that. We've seen that with some of our local rental units where for a long time they might have been handled by someone local, but they sold to a broader real estate firm, a broader housing company that's based out of state, and they have no local incentive to take care of people here. And it's all about thrift at that point. It's all about doing as little as possible, spending as little as possible, maximizing profits wherever possible. That is the incentive of larger companies. That is the incentive of most companies, and certainly of national companies. Sometimes businesses or business owners can decide out of goodwill or their own personal ethics to go above and beyond. But when you're so big that you lose the human perspective, there isn't that incentive to meet people where they're at. So when you're talking about energy options, if folks only have one choice of an energy provider, if folks only have one choice for where they buy their internet, of course you're going to do as much as you can to maximize profits. Whether that means reducing services, cutting quality, or just charging as much as you possibly can. That's what's happening in housing. That's what's happening in internet. Housing, when you're at a 0.5 vacancy rate, even if you're building lots more housing to try and increase the volume so that there's more competition, if vacancy rate remains low, the market rate for housing, the cost of renting, is going to continue to be way out of reach for a lot of working people, way out of reach for retired people, way out of reach for too many people in Faribault. I don't want to be alarmist, but an investment firm from Michigan recently, this just broke over the last week, I believe, recently purchased a manufactured home community park here in Faribault. And the headline is that there's going to be, millions of dollars of investments in improvement, but they keep in mind they bought several properties across the state of Minnesota, and so that investment number is going to be spread out across all of them. There's reason to be skeptical, and I think there's very valid reason to be concerned that having an outside investor, having someone who, or a group of people who don't have any neighborly kinship with the people in these communities, there's a very good reason to believe that folks are going to start being squeezed. And again, that investment firm is going to be looking to maximize profits at every turn. And I hope I'm wrong, but there's a track record nationwide. There's a track record in Rice County specifically. Look at what's going on with Viking Terrace and Northfield. There's precedent for things going very badly for the people who live in these communities. So I think I have a healthy amount of skepticism and concern about what the quality of life is going to be, about what the experience under new management is going to be for folks with these outside investors. All of that to say, there were several issues that came up in the debate with Mr. Hoisington, and one area that, again, I feel comfortable conveying as a difference between us is his belief that the free market can meet the needs of the people. I believe that we can work with the free market. I believe that we can work to incentivize certain things. But that just because we might be working with private partners to meet the needs of people in Faribault, of people in Rice County, does not mean that the government has a hands-off approach. And we see this all the time, right? Different local governments can decide, boy, we really need more housing. Let's work as hard as we can to make Faribault seem more appealing to people who are trying to create more housing stock in the community. And we've seen that at the county level, we've seen that at the city level, and it's effective. When you have the support of your elected officials and the city or the county or, in the metro area, you're talking about the Met Council, if your government entities can put their weight behind trying to get a certain kind of product or a certain kind of competition choices for the people in your community, that has a distinct effect on market value. And, it's the classic idea of business, right, is that competition breeds technological improvement. It drives prices down. It increases quality service as different businesses try to differentiate from each other. So trying to create more competition, in my mind, is not government overreach. Trying to create and foster more competition for energy and housing and communications infrastructure is part of bringing down the cost of living for the residents in these communities. It's not anti-business. It's not anti what's already being provided. It's serving the people. And so when I talk, where I have umbrage with the idea that the market can just fix every problem or meet the solution, well, I would look at the last 20 years of history. Do you continue to be satisfied with the market solutions to your internet, to your cell phone, telephone coverage? Are you satisfied with market solutions for high-speed internet or your power or your gasoline? Are you happy with the market solutions to those things? An example that, there isn't necessarily anything to do about it at the local level, but gas prices are still very high. And yet, it seems to be a self-imposed scarcity on behalf of large oil companies because they are making record profits. But because there is the power in the oil industry is so consolidated, that there's very little incentive to start driving prices lower because they know that people need these things. People need housing. People need communications infrastructure. In today's day and age, you need internet. You need all of these things. So if they can get away with raising the price, they will. That's what market rate is. When we talk about market rate housing, market rate just means as expensive as they can go is how high they will go. And they will only lower prices for housing, and they'll only lower prices for housing and communications infrastructure if suddenly people stop buying it. But because people continue to need it, and if that means taking out a loan to be able to get, to make it build a bill, if that means downsizing, if that means getting lower quality food, less healthy options for your family, if that means just decreasing your quality of life so that you can get the necessities, then that's what they'll do. So that's been a big concern, and when we talk about contrasting my views against my opponent, I think that's one of the big areas where we disagree. I would be much more hands-on with the issues facing the people of Faribault. I think too often we have leaders saying, "Oh, well, that's not really an issue that I do. That's not really." If I'm a council member saying that's not really a city issue, if I'm a commissioner saying, oh, that's not really a county issue, that's not really a state issue, that's more of a federal thing, or that's not really a federal issue, that's more up to states. I've truly come to believe that something is an issue for a particular government agency if someone in it decides that it's their issue. Things are county issues, things are city issues, things are state issues, if those leaders decide to make it a priority. And even if the only thing you can do is use your position as an elected official to advocate, even if the only thing that I can do as county commissioner to oppose federal spending on certain areas is to write a letter to Congress people as a commissioner saying, hey, on behalf of the people of Rice County and in the 3rd District representing the eastern half of the city of Faribault, I oppose XYZ, or I'm in favor of XYZ, then that's what I'll do. If that is the only tool at my disposal, I'll do that. But I will not shirk responsibility onto the next person in this position. I will not shirk responsibility onto other elected officials. If there is something we can do to be part of the solution at the county level, we have an obligation to do that. And I will not be hands-off on the issues facing the people of Faribault. I will do everything in my power to be effective and to make positive change on issues big and small, on issues local, national, whatever is affecting you, whatever is making your life more difficult where I might be of service, I want to be of service. So I'm here in the live stream. I'm going to pop in for any questions that you might have. Let me know if there are any particular issues that you would like to see addressed at the county level that you don't currently feel are being addressed, or if you have just questions about how this whole show works. When we talk about issues that are affecting folks, and one area that was a big topic of conversation at today's event in Garfield Park, mental health services have been talked about quite a bit, and it's been something that it's kind of a truism that we need to invest more in it, right? But what does that look like? Because we have such a deficient supply of mental health services in Rice County that is the solution simply to increase the number of mental health professionals in the area? Maybe. Does it mean hiring them directly through the county? Maybe. Does it mean trying to attract a larger institute, whether it's expanding it through Rice County Public Health, making it its own department locally. We need to be open to those things. But the truth is, whatever it is, I think the vast, vast majority of people will agree that having a proper mental health care infrastructure is vital. Not just today, not just because it's a hot button issue, a modern issue, but because we've always needed it. And whether there were other areas that were meeting the need before, or if we were just willfully ignorant of the need until very recently. It is a very real need, and it's something worthy of public investment. Now, whether there's state funding, federal funding that we can tap into, or it's something where we say, you know what, folks in Rice County, this is something that we need. This is something that every family has to deal with. And we believe that this investment will make either navigating that course easier, navigating the mental health care world easier, or we'll be able to provide those services directly to you through the county. We need someone that's going to be willing to go to bat, to understand that being forward-thinking, there's a truck going by, so I'll just let him pass. Being proactive about any issue, whether it is physical health or mental health, is going to be a lot cheaper in the long run than waiting to deal with it until it becomes an emergency. Waiting to deal with the limp until you've been living with it for a few years and you realize you need surgery. Or waiting to deal with your mental health issues, a child's mental health issues, a parent's mental health issues. It's going to be a lot more painful and a lot more expensive if we wait until that individual might be in crisis, at the point where they might be hurting themselves or others, or their road to recovery is going to be a lot longer and a lot more extreme. All of those things get more difficult the longer we put them off. And it doesn't just affect the person being treated. It doesn't just affect the immediate family. It affects their neighbors. It affects people around them. And the more we can break the stigma around mental illness, the idea that if you or a loved one are suffering, that is not a sign of deficient love, that is not a sign of deficient care, that is not the sign of a failed family structure. It is simply the sign of someone is ill. Someone is sick and they need help. That's a broader societal issue that we need to address. And the only way to address it is to address it locally. It's by having candid conversations. It's about being open about mental health challenges in your life and family members' lives. When we are proactive, it might mean having fire insurance, not knowing that there's going to be a fire. But it's a lot cheaper to have the insurance than it is to try and rebuild without it. And by being proactive about all kinds of health, physical and mental, not only will we be decreasing pain, better serving the people of Rice County, but we'll also be more fiscally responsible in the long run. Now, unfortunately, we're a little far off from being proactive because this is a deficiency in the community. It's not a projected deficiency, it's a current deficiency. So we're going to have some catching up to do. And the truth is, a lot of the issues that we continue to face at every level of government When we talk about raising funds, we're talking about deferred maintenance. We're talking about things that have been put off for far too long, whether it is infrastructure, physical infrastructure, communications infrastructure, even facilities. We're dealing with deferred maintenance at almost every level of government. Almost every city in the state is dealing with deferred maintenance. Things that have been put off simply because they could be put off. In my view, because folks didn't want to have to turn around and say, yep, this is something we committed ourselves to, so we need to follow through and do a good job of taking care of it. Because it's real easy to just say, I don't want to be the guy that raises taxes to pay for this maintenance that's required, whether it is a new roof at a county facility, boiler, anything like that. There are going to be a lot of issues as commissioner that I will need to vote on because of the actions of commissioners before me, not just, the people immediately before me who are currently serving, but people who made decisions 10, 20, 30 years ago. And now I'm having to deal with what is the most responsible path forward to address the issue that was put off, or to clean up the mess, or to carry on what someone else began. For example, I don't think I'll have the opportunity to vote on the historic block that will be almost entirely demolished in downtown Faribault, buildings that are owned by the county. I don't think I'll have the opportunity to vote on stopping those demolitions. But I am going to have to vote on the cleanup. I am going to have to vote on what's going to be there when those buildings come down. And that's where, again, I'm just going to have to be dealing with the consequences of what came before. With the new law enforcement center that is being constructed, there will no doubts be more investment that is going to be required, whether it is immediately, in the construction process, or in a few years when there's going to be a new piece of maintenance or staffing thing or any unforeseeable thing that is unforeseeable but predictable. I'm going to have to deal with those things, whether or not I would have supported the policies that got us to that point. And that's just how the world works, right? That's just how democracies work. And I think the best way to address those things, the best way to be honest about when we just need to raise funds to maintain what we already have, we just need to be, do the honorable thing and maintain our commitments, whether it's commitments to service, commitments to maintain our structures, being good stewards of the things that the county government has taken on. I think we can do all that by building relationships with the community, by being candid with community members. When we build that trust, it makes these things a lot easier to swallow. It makes these things a lot easier to understand when you already have that response. And if people can build trust in me as a county commissioner, hopefully that will help them to trust the decisions that I make. And if they hear me justify one issue, maybe it'll make it make complex issues easier to understand when I need to justify another decision. Or they will just be self-evidently justified because of how I've presented issues in the past. When you build that trust, just as an everyday neighbor working on behalf of the community, that's the truest form of democracy, right? When you look at the history of the community, everyday people have always needed to serve in their local government and make big decisions about their community. It's not just the political class versus everyone else. It's school teachers and librarians and sanitation workers and business owners and everyday people who might be voted in without putting their name on the ballot themselves, as was often the case in early Faribault, or they would do a few years in this elected position and then go back to private life, and then they'd be called to do a few years in this elected position or move to that elected position. And the reason that people would often be thrust into these situations is because they had already built that trust. They had already built that record, that reputation as a public servant. And I think we need to move more back to that, where being a public servant is not the thing about you. It is a thing about you, in addition to your other passions, to your other endeavors, to the other things that people know you from. And it doesn't mean, as a public servant, it's not an on and off switch, right? You can serve the community in an elected capacity. You can serve the community in a volunteer capacity. But when it's intrinsic to who you are, it is a single part of who you are, in addition to the creative endeavors that you do, in addition to business endeavors, to your family, to your hobbies. Trying to reframe public service away from kind of the partisan nature of politics generally, and making local government more about public service rather than politics. Now, politics is just the decision of deciding power and who has power. So that's intrinsic to any government structure. But just, again, a big part of my campaign is trying to change expectations for local leadership. And part of that expectation, I think, is changing how we view public service, and how we encourage people to serve. As always, if you want to learn more about me, about the positions that I hold, you can visit my website at any time. And of course, if you have any questions, I hope you'll pop those in the comments. I want to hear your perspectives, hear where you're coming from. You can also message the page if you would rather provide questions and stuff out there. The most compelling thing, I think, about this race and any race ideally is the conversation about the future, right? It's a conversation about the kind of world, the kind of community that we want to build. And when we can get folks excited about that, when we can understand what we're aiming for as a community, it makes it a lot easier to work backwards to whatever individual issue we might be talking about, to whatever local challenge we're trying to discuss. We've talked a lot today about markets. We've talked a lot about mental health, destigmatizing people struggling with addiction, destigmatizing people and families struggling with mental health, understanding that mental health, addiction, these things are not flaws. They are not inherent character flaws. They are not familial flaws. They are not the fault of anyone. They're just part of life. And some people face challenges with mental health and addiction, and others don't. But that doesn't make one person better than the other. It doesn't make one person stronger than the other or more right than the other. And we need to have a serious reckoning in our community about how we approach those issues. Addiction funding has a lot of promise. I know I've talked about the Rice County Opioid Response Team and the collaboration of nonprofit, government, law enforcement, health professionals to try and address the opioid crisis that affects people all over the place, but is especially, it hits Rice County, and just how successful I believe that program has been in destigmatizing things and focusing first and foremost on helping individuals, having empathy for individuals. there's no other agenda about moral failing. There's no agenda um, about poor decision making. There's no agenda about family structure, about economic structure. It's purely about what is going to help this person live a healthy, fulfilling life. And that, I think, is what makes it so successful, is first and foremost they are empathetic. And we need that approach to be emboldened. And I'm happy to hear that Rice County got that $1 million grant to distribute among their partners and further bolster the opioid and addiction resources that they have at the county level. We saw it also, a potential new treatment center got the approval of the Faribault City Council. That would be a great addition to the community. And we're always going to need more. We're always going to need more inpatient. We're always going to need more outpatient. We're going to need beds for adults, beds for children, whether it's dealing with addiction or mental health crises. We need to have local options for that, because having to send a Faribault kid to Rochester or to the cities simply because there isn't a bed for them when they're already in crisis, it's disgusting. It's inhumane, and it's pathetic that we can't, even for adolescents in mental health crisis, that we can't provide for them locally. It's pathetic, and it's a disservice to the people in crisis. It's a disservice to the mental health professionals locally who are doing everything they can. And that's where we need people to really advocate for funding, for being as effective as possible, to responsibly investing in these programs and taking that hands-on approach. And that's another example, too, of there is a great need for mental health professionals that can be paid out of pocket, mental health professionals that can be paid through insurance. There's a great need for that, and the market has not met that need. Therefore, the onus is on government entities at every level to make this happen. And so a county investment or a county commissioner advocating for these things might mean advocating for something at the state level that would be most effective. It might be advocating to the city council if that might be most effective. It might be advocating federally if that's going to be most effective. It doesn't just mean that we need to have an internal solution. We don't want to get into this mindset of we need to reinvent the wheel for ourselves. We need to fix the world's problems all by our lonesome. Of course, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about doing the most effective work possible to addressing the real concerns of the people of Faribault and of the people of Rice County. And that is what I am going to strive to do as county commissioner. Of course, I try to be as approachable as possible. I try to be as open as possible. Building trust takes time. I understand that. But I continue to be blown away by how candid people have been about their struggles, the concerns that they have about their community, the challenges that their families have faced. A question that often, is asked of candidates is, what do you see as the most pressing issue? The pressing issue facing the community in the next few years. This came up at the AAUW. And the truth is, I don't think the issue will be won't be directly related to county government. I don't think it'll be something where we can fully pull the levers to avoid it or or fix it. Most likely the biggest issue that someone faces in the next few years is a serious illness or an accident or a death in the family. Maybe they lose their home, maybe they lose their job, and suddenly they're facing that crisis. Now the community, the local government will have a place in helping them get back on their feet. But what we ought to do in those situations, and what we should strive to do from a customer service perspective, from a public service perspective, is make sure that on top of whatever very personal challenge they're facing, just, you know, the things that everybody faces in life. Everybody has to deal with family deaths. Everybody at one point or another, in one way or another, has to deal with a serious illness or accident or economic catastrophe that really is affecting them personally. What we need to strive to do is make sure that if government is involved in that struggle, that they are not going to be an aggravating factor in that struggle, that they are not going to be making things worse, causing more stress, causing more headaches, distracting them from processing their grief or personal crisis because suddenly they need to maneuver this framework or all of this paperwork or understand the legalese of social services, of emergency services, of estate plan, all of those things that are linked to these government systems. How can we make things as streamlined as possible, as painless as possible for someone having to go through government services, having to deal with paperwork and official records, maybe even court systems? How can we make sure that the worst day of this person's life is made easier and not harder by local government? And that's part of why county commissioner is such an important position, because the county government is so vital in those moments. It's where the court system is. It's where a lot of property records are. It's where you go for any sort of social service if you are facing economic insecurity and you need to pursue emergency housing options or low-income housing options. If you're dealing with a health crisis and you're going to need to switch to a public insurance. If you're dealing with a mental health crisis and you're looking for resources wherever you can find them. If you're dealing with food insecurity, you go to the county building. You talk to a county employee. You deal with a system that is administered by Rice County. And so, to a very real extent, people might only be going to the county government on extremely hard days, on bad, rotten days. So as the leaders, as the policymakers in charge of that government body, I think our goal needs to be, how can we make sure that the experience of the people that we're serving is improved by our existence rather than worsened or aggravated or annoyed? Because the county and county staff have to deal with people with facing any of those crises: economic, health, personal, legal. How can we enable staff to do their work as empathetically, as generously, as with as much comfort as possible to the people coming in? And even if we can't fix everything, even if we can't meet every need of that person, at least making them feel like they live in a community that cares, that they're dealing with a public servant who cares, who genuinely was trying to do everything that they could. Dealing with a system that understands that understands that people deal with crises. And people have really, really difficult days. And that the last thing they need to be doing is justifying their hurt, is justifying their struggle to this system, or navigating paperwork and bureaucracy and all of these things. In what ways can we streamline the process? In what ways can we cut down on the interrogation of people in crisis so that the kind people who became public servants, so that the kind people who went into public health, went into social services, went into the court system in order to help people, to be helpers, how can we enable them to be as helpful as they can be and not make the worst day of someone's life worse? That should be what we're aiming for. So then any discussion of funding, of policy changes, of staffing changes, of structural changes, even as simple as the hours that you're open, all of those things have to do with the public experience, the customer experience, if you will. Because that's how people shape their perception of their community, of their government, of their democracy. But also if they feel valued by public servants, the people helping them, that'll make it easier to value yourself. Because if the person at social services helping me cared that much about my well-being, maybe that's something I should care about too. So how can we make the system more prone to kindness and empathy rather than sterile and distrusting? Those should be the questions that we're asking when we talk about reform, when we talk about serving the people of Faribault and Rice County. Just going to pop in to check to see if we have any questions on anything. I'm going to check the Citizens of Faribault page to see if we have anything there. Of course, if you have questions at any time, please don't hesitate to reach out. My goal is to have as many opportunities like this as possible, to be as open and approachable and accessible as possible. So if you have any questions that you think of now, that you think of later, you can message me at any time, comment on a post. I'll do my best to respond, or shoot me an email. You can find all of that information on my website, samtemplecommissioner.com. If you have any specific policy questions, it might already be answered in one of my writings. You can check out my platform tab on the website, or you can find my contact information there as well. We're coming to the close on this campaign. There's 20 odd days until the election, and with the national conversation, the statewide conversation, it's kind of difficult to predict what turnout is going to be like. But if you plan to vote, and I hope that you do, make sure you bully your friends into voting. Make sure you talk to your neighbors. Make sure people are aware that there's an election, that there are important things at stake, not just statewide, but locally. And locally is where we can make a great deal of difference in people's lives. When we talk about the cost of living, when we talk about the challenges that everyday people face, to me, the most immediate remedy to a lot of those challenges will be at the local level. And I hope you can make the case to your apolitical or apathetic or hopeless friends that change is possible, that change is positive, and that democracy can be helpful. Is that what we're going to end on? Democracy can be helpful? Yeah, I think so. Well, I hope you all have a good night. Stay warm, and hopefully we don't get any more of that snow until after Election Day. I'd love to have a few leaves on the tree. I'd like to just have leaves on the. I'll settle for leaves on the ground instead of snow-covered leaves on the ground on Election Day. So we'll see if that happens. That is outside the control of a county commissioner. So unfortunately, I can't do anything about that. But I'll cross my fingers. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you very much.